reason. It used to be considered that the Unimac herd and the SAP herd were the one and the same. And it wasn't until, the 80s and 90s where a lot of collars were put out. And it was determined both by a lack of movement between the herds and also by genetics that they were, in fact, had become or were always two separate herds. But this is a carryover from when they were considered one herd, that ANS. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you, through the chair. This is Caroline Brown. What the area biologist just described is really good context. And so, providing a hunt structure would also begin to provide a harvest history.
Thank you. Additional board questions or comments? Al?
Yeah, kind of got me thinking with what section of subsistence had said, Caroline said. So when the board had passed a positive C&T for Unimac Island, didn't it show a pattern of use that was one of the criteria? And you would have some of that harvest information in there?
Through the chair, Member Barrett, yes, I actually did review the C&T worksheet that you guys found to be positive. The harvest data, there's no specific quantitative harvest data. There is definitely a pattern of use. And I think one of the challenging things about it is that pattern of use, as the area biologist mentioned, was on a combined herd, but definitely on both. So I think also in this presentation you saw that there was a fairly lengthy time of closure as well. So thank you for getting that up there. So you can see what the harvest data look like, and however, maybe the area biologist can speak to this about the biological status of the herd compared to that harvest data.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. It was closed because the population was quite low. Here's the population during that closed period. It was around 200 animals back then. It might have even been less than two, let's say between 100 and 200 animals, and that's why it was closed and remained so until we started seeing that recovery. Thank you.
Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, thank you. Dave, did anybody ever figure out why they crashed, around 2010? I remember that being super controversial, in that 2010, 11, 12 time frame. Did the department ever figure out why they crashed like they did?
I don't think there was any specific reason, although certainly that peak at 1,200 animals on an island of 1,500 square miles contributed to it. And usually in these cases, it's just a lot of density dependent related factors, lack of food, increasing stress, increasing spread of disease. It could have been some winter events. I remember, I wasn't in Unit 9 at the time, but I remember some fairly severe icing events on the island that probably contributed to the decline. And then, boy, we get these active volcanoes that spread ash far and wide. And it's interesting, we capture young adult cows, and they have no lower teeth. They're all basically ground off by the ash in their diet. So I don't know if that contributes or not, but yeah, lots of density dependent effects that, typical island biology with these ungulate herds.
Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, that's great. I didn't hear you mention wolves. Were they any kind of a factor?
Yes, they were. We did a couple attempts at calf mortality studies on Unimac Island, and our second attempt, we had better weather, and we found that yes, wolf predation is a factor on calves as well as bears. In the first 2 weeks, if I recall correctly, it was about 50% wolves and bears for predatory events on these calves. After 2 weeks, it was almost all just wolves, and we were not able to follow those calves much further out than about a month from when we collared them as neonates. So yeah, there's wolves on the island. It seems in recent years that the wolves have been down. We've seen fewer wolves while we've been out chasing caribou around. So for whatever reason, that might be contributing to this recovery as well.
Okay, and Al.
I'll just put on the record, yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm in complete support of this proposal. But if George is on the line, I would like to ask him if there's any federal action coming up or in the hopper on Unimac Island for caribou.
George, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. George Pappas, OSM. Yes, you'll see in PC 130 proposal for proposal 269, there are two related proposals in front of the Federal Subsistence Board. WP 2238B proposes to close Federal Public Lands Unit 2, Unimac Island, only to caribou hunting except for federally qualified subsistence users, unless a caribou population estimate exceeds a population threshold. I believe there was a proposal related to modifying the CNT for out there. I was asked by staff to bring forth the federal regulations at this time, the current regulations. Unimac Island only, one bull by federal registration permit only. Federal public lands are closed to the taking of caribou except by residents of False Pass. So right now it's open to False Pass, but you'll see our comments here is to support this proposal, a tiered hunting system. You didn't ask me for my position. So right now there are two, I believe there's one or if not two related to this direction for Unimac to be heard April 12th in front of the Federal Subsistence Board. Did I answer your question, Al?
Yes, you did. Thank you, George.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I'd like to follow up on that, George. You mentioned a population threshold for the closure of federal public lands to non-qualified subsistence users. Do you know what that population threshold is?
From our comments, sir, harvest available. I do not have that in the notes that were provided me from our staff. I can find out immediately. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I think we're okay. Go ahead, Orville.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'll be supporting this proposal as well. And if you understand dynamics on islands, that we're halfway there to 1,000 now. It won't be long. Usually when we start seeing that rise, sometimes it can just shoot up real fast, especially when the wolves are down. So I think we're past the threshold. I think we need to take action. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Additional board comments? If not, we may be ready for the question.
Call the question.
Question's been called.
The board has heard no concerns from the public regarding costs to private persons if this regulation is adopted.
Christie, would you poll the board?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Final action on proposal 269. Mr. Barrett?
Yes.
Mr. Keough?
Yes.
Mr. Huntington?
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher?
Yes.
Chairman Burnett?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
And Mr. Cooney?
Yes.
That proposal carries 7-0.
Thank you. Ryan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to say thanks to Dave for being here. And as we talked about with Tony Cavalock, this is Dave's last Board of Game proposal. He'll be moving on to brighter pastures here in the next few months. Thank you, Dave. You did a great job.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I move to adopt Proposal 199, prohibit trapping within 50 yards of multi-use trails and trailheads in units 13, 14, and 16.
Second.
Think been moved and seconded. This proposal was heard at our January meeting and deferred to this meeting to take up a potential amendment. I'm wondering if that amendment should be before us as an RC. 56? RC 56. Do we have someone Go ahead, Orville.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move the language in RC 56 for proposal 199.
Second.
The amendment's been moved and seconded. Discussion on the amendment? Go ahead, Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as we did in the previous meeting down in Wasilla there, deferred it to up here. We had a stakeholder meeting on it, had 8 participants in the stakeholders meeting. Various groups involved in that. Also had a couple department staff involved, Gino DeFrady, Natalie Weber, and Ryan Scott participated via Zoom. Definitely like to thank them for their participation, and especially Natalie keeping us on track as normal. We came up with a list of trails that would have restrictions on them. The language is in, as mentioned, RC 56. There's this list of, basically what it would do is it would create a 50 yards beside trails that you couldn't set certain traps on, but it wouldn't be a complete trapping closure. You'd still be allowed to use submerged underwater, well, and we went through that already in this meeting. Traps inside jaw spread of less than 5 inches, elevated at least 4 feet above ground, and by ground, we meant the ground, not the snow level. It was the intent because the snow level's fluctuating so much. Sets under ice, and then enclosed sets with only small openings, 3 inches max, weasel box, using AFWA language. I did get a few comments from people that also said that cage traps should probably be included in that because they're dog proof and are dog safe. And plus, some people lose their dogs and like to put a cage trap out with food in it to get the dog to come back. Anyways, the only concern I have with and we just didn't get any public comment on it. A couple of questions were asked to the public and people testifying. In fact, nobody saw this amendment. We haven't got any comments from ACs on it. I guess that's my only concern there is that the public hasn't had a chance to look at this amendment to see what their reaction is to it. But anyways, I guess I'll leave it at that and let the board just talk about what their thoughts are.
Additional board comments? First off, I want to thank Lynn for his hard work with other parties and the Trappers Association and the Wildlife Alliance for working on this and getting something before us that may work. Additional, go ahead, Orville.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering if Lynn would want to amend this amendment to include that trap he's talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I would amend this RC 56 language to also include cage traps.
Concur.
Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be in opposition of this amendment. I don't think it gets us to where we need to go. I don't really think it addresses the issues that were brought up in the original proposal, meaning that the trails that are selected virtually have no history of conflict between trapping and loose dogs. So it's just kind of a, let's feel good, let's make a restriction on trails that trappers and other users are not in conflict with anyways. It's not addressing the bigger issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Additional board comments, Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. During the meeting, I would say that Member Barrett is correct. These trails were not specifically identified as trails that had conflict. And I mean, just to be bluntly honest, these trails are high-use trails, daily high-use trails. They're a series of trails, some of them groomed ski trails, 12 to 14 feet wide. And even the participants from the trapping community that were there recognized it as places for people to go with their dogs to basically, we'll just say illegally recreate with their dogs, where their dogs are not on leashes, where they have someplace known that they weren't going to run into traps on or right beside the trails. And so that was kind of the compromise that took place there. Anyways, I'll leave it at that.
James?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question's for Sergeant Valentine, and I know you personally probably don't have any experience with this, but the first question is, did the troopers see this amendment, or this RC, and if so, did they have any comments on it? That's the first question, I guess, and then the second one would be whether or not there is a history that they have of any illegal trapping activity on any of these trails. It's all right if you don't know the answer to that. I know you're on the spots there, so.
Through the chair, I don't see any comments on this original proposal that I was given. I don't know I think Captain DeGraff was at that meeting in Wasilla. Yeah, he can speak to it.
Captain DeGraff?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I just found it on the website here, so I have not had a chance to review it. I just read through it quickly. It's similar to the other one in the sense there's going to be some issues kind of hard to enforce, defining what a trail is and when they move, that sort of thing. But I think common sense can prevail. But in terms of stats of illegal set traps or stats for dogs caught in legally set traps, the way that our records management system has, the way that it's structured, it's not really by game unit. It would take a significant amount of work to get the stats there. So off the top of my head, I regularly read through our daily synopsis of reports. And I know over the past year, I've seen quite a few dogs caught in traps, legally set traps. I didn't see any citations on any of them. But it varied wildly by area. I did not see a pattern emerge. Most of them tended to be in the Matsu corridor, was really the only trend that I have. So, if this was passed, I think we could do our best to enforce it. I don't see a huge issue. There might be a little confusion or training that needs to happen, but so that's my observation.
Ryan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to mention that Gino DeFrady should be online as well. He's the regional supervisor in the Matsu, and he may be able to provide some of that background as well if the board's interested.
Go ahead and follow up.
Hey, yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Ryan. And Captain DeGraff, no, it was not my intent of the question to make the public safety have to go through and find all that for the sake of this. So I just wanted to be clear about that. I just wanted to make sure that you had seen it, that's all, and to see if you had any comments. Thanks.
Okay, go ahead, Orville.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had no intention of supporting this either. I just wanted to discuss it because it was brought forward by a member of the public. They're very concerned, and it's always good to go through this process, and I really appreciate Lynn. I don't know why we put him on the spot. That was very difficult. We have two user groups who are, adamantly opposed against each other, and nothing ever good comes out this way, but maybe they've learned that they can go through the process with an amendment like RC 56 and get a little closer to what they want, because if you don't have the two groups compromise, you're really going nowhere. And this has been entrenched in Alaskan society for a long time now, and not just Alaska, but in the nation, trapping, anti-trapping. It's very difficult, and it seems to me this all came about because of one issue where it was unfortunate, and I feel for the authors, but it just seems to me sometimes as trappers, there are unethical trappers that give trappers who are trying to do it for a lifetime of living a very bad look, and I think we want to avoid that. We want this history of Alaskan trapping to go on, and people be able to make a lot of our ceremonies centered around trapping. those animals we bring in, that we have business here in Anchorage and Fairbanks working on to get our skins for memorial potlatch, very critical to our society. And I just think it was good to discuss it. I don't see this proposal having my support anyway. I just want to put that on the record thing, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any additional comments on the RC 56 amendment? If not, could you pull the board on the amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, on the amendment found in RC 56 with the inclusion of the cage traps. Mr. Keel?
Yes.
Mr. Huntington?
No.
Mr. Fletcher?
No.
Mr. Chairman Burnett?
No.
Mr. Huffman?
No.
Mr. Cooney?
No.
And Mr. Barrett?
No.
That amendment fails, 1 yea to 6 nays.
The original proposal is now before us. Al?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would like to make an amendment to that proposal. A sign will be posted at the head of at the trailhead before stating that it's an active trap line and posted before the traps are set.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded, but I wanted to clarify your amendment. Did that delete all the other language in it and just that, or was that in addition to the language in 199? As you stated the amendment, it's not clear.
Yes. My intent is, you know, there's lots of trails down there. And this proposal just deals with some of those trails that are annotated. Through public comment and public testimony, it was brought out that posting a sign at the head of the trail with nothing merely stating that it's an active trap line made people act differently that were non-trappers. So I'm not excluding any trail or including any trail. It's just in Unit 13, 14, and 16 that an active trap line will post a sign stating that it's an active trap line.
Okay, that wasn't actually what I asked you. My question was, are you deleting the rest of the language in the proposal?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, gotcha.
Just wanted to make clear on the amendment.
Gotcha, thank you.
I'm going to speak against your amendment. I think we've had a lot of process on this. We had a proposal that was specific to restricting locations of traps. We had user groups work together, came out with an amendment. We did not support that as an amendment, and this would be a totally new look at it. And I think we haven't had we've had public comment supporting that, but not looking at that as the original proposal. So I'm not going to support it. Lynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I oppose the amendment as well. I don't think that we need to, some of the testimony we received was that the Alaska Trappers Association had voluntarily went out and signed some of these trails, not that they were active trap lines, but the fact that they trapping season was open and warning trappers to be responsible and ethical, but also warning dog owners that trapping season is open and, you know, keep tight reins on your pets. And those signs have had, anecdotally, no, you know, can't prove for sure, but anecdotally, it appears that those have had quite an effect. So, I mean, I still support the voluntary signage, but no, I'm not going to support a mandatory signage. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments on the amendment? Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll withdraw my amendment. I put it on the table like Member Orville did, you know, for discussion.
I withdraw my second.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm withdrawing it. I put it on the table for discussion that I'm not adamantly opposed to trying to figure out a solution between non-users and users or trapped users. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The original proposal is before us. Were we ready for the question on the original proposal?
Call the question.
Thank you.
The board has heard no concerns from the public regarding cost to private persons if this regulation is adopted.
Thank you. Christie, would you pull the board?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, final action on proposal 199. Mr. Fletcher,
No.
Chairman Burnett,
No.
Mr. Hoffman,
No.
Mr. Cooney,
No.
Mr. Barrett,
No.
Mr. Keo,
No.
and Mr. Huntington.
No.
That proposal fails 0-7.
Okay, at this time, we're going to take a break. We have, one of our staff needs to do some technical work, I believe.
Sorry about that.
together. I think we have a number of antlerless moose proposals, which we can discuss as a group, unless there's a specific antlerless moose proposal that hasn't been brought up. So if you could move all of them except for the one in 26.
$260.
Mr. Chair, I move to adopt all the proposals, I'll read them off. I'll move to adopt proposal 249, 250, 251, 252, 253, 254, 255, 256, 257, 258, 259, 261, and 262.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Department.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So for all of the proposals just listed, the department does support having those hunts, and we do have advisory committee support of them as well.
Any board discussion? Is there any of these areas that people would like to look at the information? Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I reviewed them, and they do have AC compliance or authorization, and I'll support the AC's wishes on this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any additional discussion on this, Lynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Member Brett. I'll support these, just with the understanding that I'm assuming that the department would use the discretionary authority if this winter proves to be a little bit too tough on some of these populations, that they would either restrict or close some of these hunts for this upcoming fall.
Okay, I believe this is an important management tool, and I believe that when those were moved, proposal 260 was excluded from this. So all the proposals except for reauthorization, except for 260 are included in this. And that did not get AC approval.
Call the question.
Question's been called.
The board has heard no concerns from the public regarding cost to private persons if this regulation is adopted.
Christie, could you poll the board on this?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, on the antlerless moose reauthorization proposals, read into the record by Member Hoffman. Mr. Cooney,
Yes.
Mr. Barrett,
Yes.
Mr. Keough,
Yes.
Mr. Huntington,
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher,
Yes.
Chairman Burnett,
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman.
Yes.
Those proposals carries 7-0.
Mr. Chair, I move to adopt proposal 260, reauthorize the antlerless moose season in the western portion of Unit 26A Alpha.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. And I understand that we do not have AC support for this, so I would ask that we take no action on this, if you could move that.
Mr. Chair, I move to take no action on proposal 260.
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we take no action on proposal 260 as a result of not having AC support. Any objection? Without objection, we will take no action on proposal 260. Go ahead, Stosh. Orville.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On these, like proposal 260, even though there was no action taken, let's just say for the North Slope AC met and they approved it, would we come back and do it then, or what's the process? Because I know we had one in the last meeting, and I was really concerned about it because we left so much on the table, and I don't think that was a wise decision by any means, but the law only allows us to do so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, if we have a meeting where we could reach that, we could take that up. But I believe that there was a number of attempts to get the AC here to meet and approve this, and they failed to do it. So it looks like we won't be seeing this again at this point. We'll take it. We can take it up at next year. It could happen again. And authorize a season, but at this point we can't reach it. Natalie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, once this hunt goes away, it does not have the statutorily required advisory committee support for it. It will be removed from the codified regulation, so it will require a proposal be brought back in front of this board in order to have an antlerless hunt in this area.
Yeah, thank you. I may have left that part out when I was explaining. Go ahead, Stosh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to reconsider proposal 267.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to take up 267 under reconsideration. Stosh, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, after hearing all the information throughout the meeting and weighing in all the public testimony and AC testimony, especially from the local AC in 19A, we're from my understanding, our only recourse is to ask the department to go and count sheep, which we've already been told, and we know there's no sheep there. So I don't think we're gaining anything here, and I have a major problem with that. When an AC that has a high mixture of non-resident, some guides, and all of them unanimously said, let's close the sheep hunting season down. I don't, so that's where I stand right now, and I have a little more to say here if this gets any traction.
Stosh, did you make a motion to amend that to close the season? Oh, the motion to reconsider is in front of us. Is there any objection to the motion to reconsider? Without objection, brought before us on reconsideration. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I move to amend the proposal to close down sheep hunting unit 19A for 2 years.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to amend proposal 267 to close hunting in 19C for a period of 2 years. I'd like to hear from the department.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We were unaware that this was coming, so I just want to make a point that Josh Pierce, the area biologist, is not with us. I think we've been pretty clear about where we're at with sheep populations and the concerns across sheep ranges here in the state. You know, it is a weather-related event. So the continued hunting opportunity, it's not gonna slow the recovery. There is a question, though, you know, how low is too low? And that's something that's been asked of me several times. I don't know the answer to that. You know, hanging our hat on the full curl ram harvest, knowing that it's weather-related, looking at history where these weather-related declines take a while to, a long period of time to rebound. Are leaving sheep on the mountain, is that a bad thing? No, it's not. Is the opportunity still there? Yes, it is. However, should the board adopt this, it's not gonna, you know, it's not a bad thing. And it's a question, as I mentioned, you know, how low is too low? Other species, we've definitely taken action where if we get a decline to a certain point, we've made the move to close those seasons. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Additional comments. I have a question for you. You know, I'm not a sheep biologist. And I don't even want to climb up those mountains and hunt sheep myself right now. But sheep kind of live in family groups. Full curl management makes a lot of sense on its face. But if those groups of sheep get down to small numbers in each of those groups, how well, you know, do the young rams get around to repopulate the area? You know, because if you're taking the full curl, the dominant male or the male out of a small group. So does full curl management work for all population sizes is what I'm getting at. And, you know, what is the dynamic here?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I believe that in some of the information that was provided by Mr. Wendling, you know, reproductive success is lower for younger rams. They're just not as good at it. However, I am also not a sheep biologist, but I'm joined by a person with a lot of experience with sheep, Mr. Darren Bruning.
Thank you, Mr. Burton.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Darren Bruning. I'm the Region 3 Interior and Eastern Arctic Supervisor for the Division of Wildlife Conservation. And thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I believe Ryan covered it, but I believe your question was if the younger rams would breed, and the short answer to that is yes. The younger rams would do the breeding. There is research that suggests they're not as effective or efficient in their breeding, but they do breed. Also, I can state that in the coming years, we have research that we are initiating in Region 3 to actually answer that question about what role do the younger rams play in breeding. And we are excited about that research because we will have those data to share with you in the coming years.
So my question on that research, is it going to happen before there's no sheep left or after?
Mr. Chairman, it will, there will be sheep remaining while the research is being conducted and after. The sheep populations will rebound. They will. The amount of time is unknown. Nobody knows the exact amount of time, but the sheep populations will rebound. Doll sheep in Alaska have lived here for, innumerable years, and we don't even really know exactly how many years, but tens of thousands of years. And during that time, they have experienced all of the climatic extremes and all of the weather conditions that go along with living in Alaska within their suitable habitats. And one way to look at it is they're on the very edge of their range here in Alaska, right? This is the farthest north and the farthest west that the species goes in our country and on this continent as well. And so they live in a land of extremes. They have population fluctuations over time that none of us have ever experienced and witnessed ourselves, but they'll continue with these fluctuations. The sheep have declined in areas that we certainly know that now, but we also know that there will be some rebound. The unknown is climate moving forward and how long that climate impacts, or what it would be the length of time before we can really measure effects of climate. We don't have those answers at this time, but that is a unknown at this time, is what effect climate will play over the big picture over the long term.
Additional questions? This is a question for Ryan. It's kind of a technical question, probably for both of you, but we know that the commissioner could shut this hunt down through an emergency order if there was a biological reason. But what would the standard be for the commissioner to shut this down?
Mr. Chairman, I think there's a couple different answers to that. If we were to determine there isn't a harvestable surplus at all, that'd be a good reason. We have not established a threshold on the total number of sheep to consider, a line that we would recommend to the commissioner that it would be closed. Potentially, we could do that, but we haven't at that point. Frankly, there's other avenues to accomplish that. Members of the public can certainly reach out to the commissioner, and we've seen that before as well. Of course, it is going to come to us, goes to the commissioner's office, then comes to the division for input. So that's, I guess that's the primary way we would go about it.
Okay, Jake.
Hey, thanks. I know we're talking a little bit about like body condition of younger rams. I've never got my hands on a younger ram. Are we just talking about strictly about like fat when we're talking about body condition?
Through the chair, that's typically, that's one of the main measurements is the amount of fat and how it fills their frame. And there's different metrics that we use of measuring body condition, but fat is one of the ways that we do determine that.
Board discussion. Go ahead, Orville.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been scrambling here. I could try to find papers to look at here. And closest I can get was RC 35 by the McGrath AC on their motion to amend proposal 267 to close sheep hunting to both resident and non-resident hunters in 19C for 2 years, passed unanimously 8-0. So there is a AC support for this. All right, I just want to get something on the record. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I do sympathize with Member Hoffman's concerns here, and I kind of think we were in error during our original deliberation that we didn't bring the McGrath AC's concern to the, at least get it on the record. I have some concerns with this amendment, that we would be closing something off of 100% anecdotal or local knowledge and absolutely not be able to back it up at all with any current information from the department. Other concern I have is, one option is, in the sheep community, it sounds like it's pretty well known. 19C's got a low density of sheep. I actually think that in itself will limit participation on both sides of the aisle, whether it be resident or non-resident. Why would you want to go hunt a low density and spend the time, effort, and all that on a low density population? But I guess my other concern would be by closing it, we displace those hunters that were going to participate potentially there, and we put them over into other areas that are basically experiencing the same thing, low densities of sheep. So I don't know that I support this amendment to close it completely.
Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess a question for Darren, and I wanted to follow up with Member Fletcher's concept of younger sheep, attempting to breed or breeding. That's not unnormal at all in the sheep world or the moose world, that younger animals expend a extra amount of energy, just like the larger adults. Through that process, they're learning and they're sparring, and they're not just sitting on the sidelines getting fat neither. I was wondering if that's something true too.
Through the chair to Member Brett, your specific question, could you repeat
my
it?
specific question would be that, people are concerned that, younger rams, if they were potentially involved in the breeding or the rut season, that they would go into the winter, thinner because they're younger. They don't have the fat supply as an older, mature adult does. That's my question. My belief is yeah, they go in thinner anyways because they do participate at some level in the rut.
Through the chair to Member Brett. I have no data to draw upon, immediately in my mind about assessing whether younger rams would end up in less, lower body condition, lower quality body condition going into the winter due to breeding. I don't know if that question has been answered with specific research, but I agree with you. I've heard that being said, but I do not know if there's specific research that supports that.
James is next.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to continue to build the record here, we've heard from the comments from the McGrath AC, and I just wanted to, unless there's something that's changed, direct the board to RC 044 from the author of the proposal 267. Resident Hunters of Alaska asked us, should the board decide to completely close sheep season in 19 Charlie, which is now what we're discussing, the Resident Hunters of Alaska, the author of the proposal, asked us that we not amend their proposal 267 to accomplish that. Okay.
Thank you, James. Stosh.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Well, we are and we aren't. the McGrath AC asked that we do that. And that's what I'm honoring here. And also, to follow up on part of Member Kehoe's question, to, the way I kind of heard the part of that was, why close this when those hunters are gonna go someplace else? Well, this one's on the table and this has a problem. I mean, to not address this problem because it might pose a problem to someone else doesn't make sense in my mind. We have to I think we need to address this one, and if that comes up, then we might have to do the same thing.
Ryan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I guess just to add a little bit to Member Kehoe's comments and Member Hoffman's comments as well. This was, the department identified that as well. What happens with displacing hunters, and I think Member Hoffman, hit the nail on the head, but it's something that we realize could happen. It's also important, I think, for the board to know that there are other requests out there to close sheep seasons in various places. The Federal Subsistence Board recently received a wildlife special action for Unit 24, and I don't remember the entire area, but these conversations are happening. The other thing I wanted to mention, though, is that, and I am not clear on the process, and we would have to dig into it, the AC has an ability to address this hunt on their own. And again, I don't know how that works, and perhaps the Department of Law could walk us through that, or even Natalie, but there is a mechanism in place for the AC to make some strides on their own.
Natalie or Department of Law have any comment on that?
Mr. Chairman, there is a process. It's in 5AAC 96 that allows ACs to close a hunt following certain procedures that are stated in regulations that were adopted by the joint boards.
Okay. Perhaps we'll take a short at ease so we can refer to that individually. Go ahead.
Just to clarify,
Christine.
that's 97, 5AAC Chapter 97. It's an
Okay.
advisory committee closure
Thank you.
process.
So perhaps someone could speak to which ACs have jurisdiction over this 19C.
Mr. Chairman, that's going to take a minute too.
Okay, we'll remain at ease until someone can get that.
Thank you.
put that
Mr.
on the record.
Chairman,
Go ahead.
the emergency closure procedures are 5AAC 97010, and immediately prior to that is a list of the advisory committee jurisdictions. And for Unit 26, just above, if you're looking at the same page there, page 1158, for Unit 26, it's the North Slope Advisory Committee and Fairbanks Advisory Committee.
Well, we're looking at Unit 19C. 19C.
Sorry about that, Mr. Chairman, my brain was still on something else. So just look through that same, you'll get to 19D, prior page 1157, and it lists Game Management Unit 19, McGrath Advisory Committee, Central Kuskokwim Advisory Committee, Lower Kuskokwim Advisory Committee, Bethel Advisory Committee, Lake Minchamina, if I'm saying that right, Advisory Committee, Anchorage Advisory Committee, and SHAC.
Yeah, okay, so that would require the concurrence of a number of advisory committees in order to get to that, using that procedure, I would believe, okay. Additional board discussion on this? Go ahead, James.
Yeah, thanks. Member Hoffman, I just got to go back to the RC that Resident Hunters of Alaska submitted, and forgive me, I'm just, I'll humbly admit, I did understand your answer to the question. We're not trying to amend their proposal to accomplish what their letter asked, or no? I just was trying to understand.
McGrath AC suggested you do that, and there's no other way to get there at this point.
Yeah, so we have a public comment and a RC and a AC that are in conflict. So that's really where the ones in the middle. Go ahead, Orville.
I was just going to say what you said, this is board property now, and although they may not want it, it really doesn't have a lot to do with actually how we hunt. It's we're trying to conserve that herd, which is the board is mandatory, and as well as the department, to conserve these herds when they're in danger of going, of harming themselves. And this population is extremely low, and our priority is conservation. And that's our role as board members and the department's role. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of other people that have a role in conserving this herd, which would include the guides that are here that have a ethical responsibility to inform their customers as to the population dynamics in the area which they're going to take someone hunting before they book a hunt. So it would be unethical for a guide to take someone to not tell someone what the probability of success is and what the condition of the game management. So if we have ethical guides, it's likely that there will be, and I assume all guides are ethical, otherwise they wouldn't be able to keep their license. It's a good chance that there'll be lower pressure. Go ahead, Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate the team that we have here, and frankly, just made aware that in 2015, we did make a statement when we closed sheep hunting in Unit 23 that the population was depressed enough that we felt like we needed to do that. I don't have the metrics, and it's a different area, right, with a different history. But one of the keys to that, right, is for us to actually know how many sheep are currently on the hill. And that's been a challenge. I mean, but there's a bunch of pilots in this room, and we all understand that we try at times and we can't get there. But I did want to make the board aware of that action in 2015. Thank you.
Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to follow up a little bit on your comment on responsible guides, letting their clients know or self-regulating themselves by taking less or no sheep hunters in. That same thing applies to the residents of Alaska. They're following this. There's been a lot of comments that they're seeing less sheep, and they can do the responsible thing too and go to a more productive area or make them choices themselves too. Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jake.
Hey, thanks, Mr. Chair. In our conversations we had yesterday about this, I asked the area biologist, about the Siri land, and very quickly it was talked about. There's only 10% of the land, in Siri, and only 10 rams taken out of that. But that's 25% of the ram take in a very little area. I don't think that we know enough about these sheep populations. I don't want to discount what everybody's saying from the hills, but I spend a lot of time up there. There's drainage specific events that could hurt sheep. I just don't think we have enough. I don't know enough information. It's tough though.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in the same boat here. I'm very concerned about the public comments we've heard, and even from the McGrath AC, they gave great public testimony when they called in. My concern is that in order to make a decision on this as a board, at least for me, I'm having a really hard time deciding without the numbers in front of us. And hearing what Ryan just said, that the department has in the past provided an example of when they've closed it once they've known the numbers, I'm inclined to kind of lean that direction because I don't know for a fact anything.
Go ahead, Stosh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to speak to a little more, the McGrath AC, again, I'll reiterate that they're mixed, they're guides, the person that called in knows that area better than anyone here, and that guy spent his life in that area. And I used to say, Brett Gibbons used to treat those sheep that they were his own, and that's the mentality I think that a trooper has to have. And if he's sending off the red flag saying, look, something's very wrong, we all want it to stop. These are subsistence people and guides saying, look, we're done. For the sheep's sake, let's stop. That's what they told all of us. And I don't know any way to get there. And if we want to send people out to go count sheep to tell us there's no sheep, I think that's a waste of time.
Go ahead, Orville.
Yeah, I don't think I could say it any better than Stosh said it, but I'll try. I think, the reason we're here as a board is we're supposed to be conserving these. That's legally our binding legal obligation of why we're here serving. I think if we look beyond that just for trying to speculate that somehow miraculously that sheep herd came back all of a sudden, I don't even think the best science is going to give you that when they're done counting. Like Stosh said, these hunters have been out there. They're the ones that want us to take action, and I'm going to take that very seriously. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Go ahead, Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I do agree with Member Hoffman's comments there. I just think it's, I don't know, I'm going to use the word irresponsible, but for the board to make a decision strictly off of anecdotal information and absolutely zero biological information. I mean, everybody can say there's no sheep there. The department's kind of told us that they're going to make their best effort this summer to do a population survey. And again, I would guess maybe Mr. Scott could answer the question. If they do their survey late June, early July, get it in, realize that, yeah, that you're so far down that you don't believe there's a surplus, a harvestable surplus, you would EO that closed, would you? At that point, the commissioner would?
Through the chair, Member Kehoe, in a perfect world, sure. But we get that in late June and early July, and sheep season opens August 10th, I believe, in that area. It might be August 1st. I want to say yes, but I think this board can recognize those challenges, and that's fine. I mean, we've dealt with that before. The timing is difficult here, just based on survey timing and season started, but I mean, we take our responsibilities very seriously too. And if that's where we land, then certainly an option.
You want to follow up on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess one of my other points is that, talking to the biologist yesterday, he was still comfortable with allowing the subsistence harvest to take place. They did change the bag limit from ewes to under 3/4 crow rams. So again, I think as long as subsistence needs are being met, I think we should probably hold off till we actually get some hard data and decide whether it needs to be closed, needs to be limited on who's able to take, or a variety of other options, I guess, available to us. Thanks.
Jake, next.
Yeah, I did notice that, yesterday when I was talking to the area biologist that, he had a difficult time doing sheep surveys, and maybe that should be something we should talk about. What if he doesn't get a chance to get out there and look at this population? before the opener season.
Go ahead, Stash.
Yeah, thank you for that. So another big factor that I'm dealing with here is we heard from the ACs, everyone knows the population is down. And now we just had a super high snowfall. It's going to be less now than it was when they told us, when they already said, let's stop. What's the snow level and what's your take on survival rate for young sheep?
Through the chair to Member Hoffman, you're asking what the snow level is in 19C right now?
Do you have concerns about this winter and sheep survival?
Through the chair to Member Hoffman, earlier when snow started falling and then there were some rain events, we initially, for the interior, we initially had concerns that there could be impacts to sheep that were significant. As the winter went on and we were able to get out in the air and take a look at some of the sheep range, we discovered that the conditions were not as adverse to the sheep as we thought they might have been. We saw in some areas, but again, I want to clarify that I'm not specifically speaking about 19C, but just in general, that there were windswept areas that we would expect to see in Alaska range habitats, and that there did not appear to be ice encrusted areas over expansive, areas of land that would exclude them from forage. So at that point, biologists in the interior in Region 3 felt more comfortable that we weren't facing a winter that may have significant impacts on sheep. However, having said that, we won't know until spring and summer, and then of course then when we do surveys, we'll have some ideas of the welfare of the sheep at that point.
Go ahead, Stash.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And the reason I really pronounced that is because the Iron Dog and the Iditarod run through, and everyone, and I know a lot of people that participate in both, and that those races go through 19C, and every one of them said the snow is abnormally high this year, and not only high but wet. So to me, I'm not an expert sheep hunter. In fact, I'm the opposite. I'm a non-expert sheep hunter, but doesn't seem like we're gonna lose a lot of young sheep, is what I'm thinking.
Additional board discussion and comments on the amendment.
Thank you,
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's been a lot of great discussion and a lot about population dynamics. This is not the first time any one board has went through a low sheep population. I'm guessing, because I couldn't go back and look at charts and stuff, but I'm guessing like 2012 or 13. Generally, the state was going through a decrease in population, and we had to go through it. 20A had the same concerns when the sheep population was really low out there, and we have a biologist from the area that can address that. The thing is that the harvesting of mature rams, 8 years old and full curl, that portion of the population is sustainable, and that's not been proven wrong yet. And that's what I'm going on. But if this amendment doesn't pass, maybe you consider just shortening the season as a different option. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Additional comments, questions on the amendment? If not, Christie, could you call the roll on the amendment to 267?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, on the amendment to 267, which was to close sheep hunting in Unit 19C for 2 years. Mr. Keough.
No.
Mr. Huntington.
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher.
No.
Chairman Burnett.
No.
Mr. Hoffman.
Yes.
Mr. Cooney.
No.
And Mr. Barrett.
No.
That amendment fails, 2 yeas to 5 nays.
Thank you. Any additional discussion on the proposal, which is now before us. Don't see any additional discussion on the proposal.
Call the question.
Question's been called on the proposal.
The board has heard no concerns from the public regarding cost to private persons if this regulation is adopted.
Go ahead and call the roll again.
Final action on proposal 267, Mr. Fletcher?
No.
Chairman Burnett?
No.
Mr. Hoffman?
No.
Mr. Cooney?
No.
Mr. Barrett?
No.
Mr. Keo?
No.
Mr. Huntington?
No.
Proposal fails 0-7.
Thank you. And do we have any other proposals to bring up? What? We do have one more that some people would think was important. So, brown bear.
Mr. Chair, I move to adopt Proposal 261. We authorize resident grizzly brown bear tag fee exemptions throughout interior and northeast Alaska.
Second.
Been moved and second that we take this up. Any comments from the department?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just that the department does support this proposal, and there is also substantial advisory committee support of it as well.
Any discussion from board members? I think this allows for the hunter to be in the field and see a bear in many areas and not have to have gone out and got a tag beforehand, so probably a good thing. Any additional discussion? Call the question.
Call the question.
The board has heard no concerns from public regarding cost to private persons if this regulation is adopted.
Christie, would you call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, final action on proposal 261, Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Cooney?
Yes.
Mr. Barrett?
Yes.
Mr. Keo?
Yes.
Mr. Huntington?
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher?
Yes.
Chairman Burnett?
Yes.
The proposal carries 7-0.
Mr. Chair, I move to adopt Proposal 262, reauthorize the current resident tag fee exemptions for brown bears in units 18, 22, 23, and 26A alpha.
Second.
This has been moved and seconded. Anything from the department?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very similar to the last one, the department supports the proposal, and there is substantial advisory committee support as well.
Thank you. Any discussion from board members? Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a really great tool. It allows people to incidentally harvest grizzly bears while out doing other activities, and I support it.
Okay, thank you. Are we ready for the question?
Call the question.
Question's been called.
The board has heard no concerns from the public regarding cost to private persons if this regulation is adopted.
Christie, would you pull the board?
Yes, final action on proposal 262, Mr. Barrett?
Yes.
Mr. Keo?
Yes.
Mr. Huntington?
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher?
Yes.
Chairman Burnett?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
And Mr. Cooney?
Yes.
The proposal carries 7-0.
Okay, at this time, I have a request from the Department of Law. There were 4 proposals that were outside the Board of Games Authority. And I'd just like to put on the record, if you would, why we have no authority to do these, so that the proposers would understand on the record why we are not taking these proposals up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The board is limited by statute and does not have administrative or budgeting authority. Certain fees are set by the legislature, and the board can't set those fees. So a couple of these dealt with fees or payments that the board doesn't have authority over. There was also one regarding marine mammals. The state does have some jurisdiction over marine mammals, but to a large extent, that authority is preempted under the Marine Mammals Protection Act. So the federal government primarily manages marine mammals or regulates them. And then there was one other that had to do with waterfowl, and again, that's one where the Migratory Bird Act in large part preempts what authority the state has in order to do that, and the federal regulations address hunting waterfowl from boats, and this one would have conflicted with the federal regulation. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take a break now before we go on to miscellaneous business. Thank you. Go ahead, Eddie.
Just how to liven up the discussion. The Commissioner's Office just got a request. Want to know if you could set a season and bag limit for Bigfoot. I got it on my phone right here, honest to God.
And my response to that is, if the commissioner would like to propose a specific season for that, it'd be open for proposal. So does he want it statewide or regionally? I'm not sure which areas Bigfoot occur in Alaska. I have only seen them in Canada, so.
We don't have that information either, Mr. Chairman.
I would need a definition to start with.
We'd need a definition, a species name, and genus and species, and what does he want to do with salvage requirements?
I don't believe the commissioners even saw this yet. It came into our special projects assistant, Carrie, and she forwarded it to myself and a couple other people.
Okay, well, we'll be looking forward to that as a proposal in the future meeting, but at this point, we'll take a break and then go to our miscellaneous business agenda. Thanks. I got to practice with that hammer. So we could call the meeting of the Board again back to order. We've gone through all of our regulatory business. We have a miscellaneous business agenda to complete. And the first thing on that agenda is our bear conservation, harvest, and management policy, which is expiring this month. And there's an interest in updating that. I think we have department comments on that. Natalie and Mr. Paraguay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, it's been identified by Mr. Paraguay that there is some language in here that could stand to be updated, especially in light of information he presented earlier at this meeting, and he can speak to those changes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, board members. For the record, my name is Tom Paraguay. I'm a regional wildlife biologist in the Fairbanks office for the Department of Fish and Game. The one statement in here that is a bit dated right now, it's in the bear policy on page 2, and it talks about, at that point, an average of about 1,500 brown bears and grizzly bears is harvested each year. The trend has been increasing, possibly because of both increased demand for bear hunting and increased bear numbers. If you recall, during the first day of the meeting, I gave a presentation about trends in intake of large predators, and that was just for the non-coastal area, but the trend is the same at the statewide level as well. The take of brown bear peaked around 2010 to 2013, and it's been slowly declining since then. So I just wanted to point that out, that if you're going to update the policy, it should reflect the correct information we have.
And question for Natalie. Historically, this policy was adopted with an expiration date of 2022. What time period typically is used for board findings?
Mr. Chair, board findings can last indefinitely. They can last until they're superseded by another one. For these, we've usually been using about a 5-year time frame. However, given the board's 2-year cycle, or excuse me, 3-year cycle, I'd recommend a 6-year time frame for this one.
Thank you. Al, did you have any comments on this?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe I'll just start with, I didn't find any reason or any history on why some findings and some policies have expiration dates and others don't. And I'm wondering why we have expiration dates on the ones we do.
Through the chair, these in particular were created at a time where all of the information we were collecting and the public perception of the changes that were being made were all changing so rapidly that by setting an expiration date, it forced the board to reevaluate them at a finer scale than if they were just indefinite. So it provided an avenue for the department to bring new information, for the board to take into consideration things like court cases, any statutory changes, those kinds of things. So it's entirely up to the board if or when these expire and when they are to be reviewed.
Thank you, Natalie. Any other? Orville.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What was the purpose of this policy? Was it for predator control or something?
Member Huntington, through the chair. In terms of the purpose of the policy, it is listed at the top of the bear policy, the actual purposes and goals of it. But at the time, some of the practices changed in terms of when they were allowed and under what regulation structure. For example, taking brown bears over bait, sale of hides, things like that, for a period of time are only allowed under predator control regulations. And at times then the board allowed them to be used under harvest because they were found that they weren't causing a conservation concern. So that's why, especially at the bear policy at the bottom, they list several different practices in there. And so if you go back in these in time, in previous 5-year intervals, you'll see that that list changed over time. So this is really a way where changes were rapid. It was one way to make it clear to the public why the board may allow certain practices in certain areas or under certain conditions.
Thank you. Go ahead, Orville.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for my own indulgence, I guess, the Department of Subsistence, it seems all our Native American practices around bears is not in this anywhere. I'm just curious why.
Of course, this was adopted by the board in 2017, but go ahead, Natalie, do you have any response?
Mr. Chair and members of the board, it might be as simple as the fact that under customary and traditional use practices, that's the one place in regulation where you can take sows with cubs and use artificial light in dens. So it's entirely possible that it was very intentional for the board to leave those out of this policy.
Orville, any additional follow-up?
Oh, no, I intend not to support it for that reason. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Al?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Does the department believe that the purposes and policies and the goals of this bear management policy were met and potentially no longer needed?
Through the chair, and Mr. Scott can help me answer this question as well. Regardless of this policy, the department will still manage for conservation, and there isn't anything, it does help. It has been a very useful tool. I will just leave it at that. The department will continue to manage for conservation regardless of if this policy is in place or not. Mr. Scott?
Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through the chair, Member Brett, I think we do need it. I think it's been successful. We refer back to it. Can't remember any real specific examples in this proposal, but certainly when we start getting down into regional proposals addressing bears and other species, when there are findings, we look to see how the board wanted us to go. I do believe they have been successful, and as Natalie said, we're not going to do anything to jeopardize a population, but I would encourage the board to keep these on the books, and the intent here was to just clean up some language.
Yeah, I would note for the record that this policy has been in effect since 2006 originally, but it's been readopted by the board a number of times. I do think it would be appropriate for the board to consider changing the paragraph that talks about increasing harvest, because that was true in 2006 to 2012, but it's now been decreased. There is a trend of decreasing harvest. And I think it would be appropriate because it's not a population decrease, it's a decrease in harvest. It would be appropriate to make that change, and if there's any other changes that the board feels are appropriate. Al?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If the board wishes to try to go through a change on this policy, I don't know exactly where it is, but I wrote up a draft change to this policy, and I thought we had it somewhere on our line here, but I had submitted a draft, I think, in Dillingham, that got kicked down the road, and then the pandemic hit and stuff. So, yeah, I thought I had it somewhere in here. I had submitted it at a prior board meeting. I do have a copy of it that I thought earlier when I checked on it and I was going to RC it, and I asked board support, and I thought I heard that it was online somewhere.
Oh, I'm sorry about that, Mr. Brett. I thought you were meaning the findings.
Oh.
So be happy to help distribute that if you'd like me to.
And I'll get that to everybody, but the gist of my draft was there's multiple times the word trophy is used in this management plan. And we have defined, or the board head game has defined what a trophy is, and it doesn't match what the word trophy is being used for in the policy. And I substituted the word trophy in many places to mean adult mature bears or adult mature male bears. Because there's this perception, and I kind of don't like it, and I hear that a lot of meetings, that people that aren't practicing subsistence are trophy hunters. And, you know, I get a little angst with that, you know, they're just hunters. And so when we start talking about trophy management and trophy bears, that it doesn't match our definition, so I'd like to have things consistent with our definitions in codified.
So Christie, do you have his proposed amendment handy that could be given to us as an RC?
I do not have it. Mr. Brick, could you email it to me and I'll print it off? Thank you.
Okay, with that, I think we'll hold this and move to our next agenda item, which is the wolf management policy. We can come back to the bear management policy after we see that RC. And again, is there anything has changed that would suggest that we should change the policy? And that's to the department and to board members.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, the department has not identified anything in the wolf management policy other than the expiration date that would need changed.
And Ryan, does the department find the wolf policy to be an appropriate and useful tool?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very similar to the bear policy, yes. Wolves are a constant discussion. We have regular proposals on them, and we utilize the board's direction there pretty regularly.
Discussion from board members. And this wolf management policy has been in place since when? It looks like it was new in 2000. Let's see. Do we know when the findings were new?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The exact date escapes us, but it's been in place since at least the early 90s.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if this is the type of policy that Al referred to, where we should, instead of bringing it up every 5 years, have it in place until superseded. And that's another option for the board to consider. Orville.
Yeah, I almost have the same concerns with this one, except on the top of page 2. It almost discusses why we harvest wolves in the Kaikuk. The traditional, but they say economic harvest, which is not always true. We don't do it for economic reasons. We do it for ceremony. And in fact, working with the Department of Fish and Game on Upper Kaikuk, the biologist there was happy to work around what we were doing and actually acknowledge what we were doing in his studies and in his reports. It should have been in here. I don't see it in here, but anyway, it's again why I won't support the policy.
Would you support that if it was added, the policy, if that portion was added appropriately?
Yes, in fact, I would support both policies if you just acknowledge that we were out hunting bears long before there was a state of Alaska. We were out hunting wolves long before there was a state of Alaska. And trapping them, we danced. I made a song for my late wife, and I sang with that wolf skin in my hand. It means something. It means something to those people there. That's all I was saying. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So you would be more comfortable with an acknowledgement of customary and traditional uses in an appropriate manner?
I think it helps with management. It always has. We've acknowledged it. The board has acknowledged it. The department biologists have acknowledged it. It's just something that I just don't want to let go. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, that would take a little wordsmithing, but I think it's something that we could probably do fairly easily, or get the department to do. Any other discussion on the wolf policy, Al?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it kind of goes with even the bear policy. When you say you use these things, do you have to use some of them when you're dealing with the court systems, when people are suing the state? And do they have any standing in there, since they're not a regulation?
Through the chair, Member Brett, I'm not going to address any litigation strategy about cases that we're currently involved in. But it's just speaking in general terms that yes, when the board provides policy guidance and direction, that is something that the Department of Law would rely on, as well as the Department of Fish and Game.
Thank you.
Thank you. Additional board discussion on these findings? Go ahead, Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to extend a very heartfelt thank you to Member Huntington for his comments. I would ask for some time, not like a few hours this afternoon. I think we want to do a good job with this, and we want to add that information in, and it would be, it's going to involve us, Division of Subsistence. Frankly, I can see reaching out to others as well. So I don't know what kind of timeline you're hoping for or we're looking for, but potentially even, when we meet in Southeast, we could have, a new version ready by then. If you don't want to wait that long, I understand, but I think trying to do it in an hour or two this afternoon is, I don't know that it'd do it justice.
Well, I understand that, and these do technically expire at the end of this month. And perhaps the correct action would be for the board to consider extending these policies as written until, say, next March or next January, and then we would have another opportunity to look at that. Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I realize that, they say they expire, but do we lose anything by letting them expire and just at the next Board of Game meeting, submit a new policy?
Perhaps not, and I would ask Ryan what he thinks on that, and perhaps Cheryl.
Yeah, Department of Law would be good to weigh in. We're not going to change how we're using them, regardless of the date, and we can refer back to them. In addition, it's my feeling that you've built on the record here on why you might hold off and waiting for an update. It's not that you're doing away with the policy, just we're making changes, but I would leave that to Cheryl.
Mr. Chairman, the Department of Law is fine with that.
Okay, so any other board discussion on these policies? Go ahead, Jake.
Hey, thanks. I think Member Huntington's comments are extremely important, and I'd be curious to see what he would, thinks about if we adopted this for a certain period of time, or whether it's best to let it lapse.
Go ahead, Orville.
Well, I don't really know how much these policies go anywhere. The findings should have included it, but I think we've had policies in the past, like on the Board of Fisheries, for working with Native American tribes. We just did it without the policy, and we didn't really address the issue, but they had passed a policy that, we'll deal with the Native American tribes and managing fisheries, and it was just there. We never referred to it or anything. We were able to manage it just fine without referring to the policy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So with this discussion and myself not being prepared to, get with potentially an RC in front of all the board members, I would make a motion that we let these expire and we add them to our agenda at the first Board of Game meeting next year.
I think that's good, and I would encourage everyone to look at Al's edits and to consider how the acknowledgement of the customary and traditional uses, et cetera. I think the department certainly has people that can put that together pretty nicely. And I would just wanted to refer to Al's suggested, Member Barrett's suggested amendments to the Board of Game policy is substituting a harvestable opportunity for trophy in some areas where it probably makes more sense, and then acknowledging the uniqueness of the certain species and types and locations of animals that are found only in the U.S., like Kodiak bears and the bears on the southeast Alaska and the Alaska Peninsula, where they have unique characteristics that makes them a desirable species. Anyway, with that, is there any objection to simply moving this to our next agenda, our next meeting? Or work session, if we have one before then. Thank you. Okay, at this next on our miscellaneous business agenda is to discuss having a summertime all-day work session on Dall sheep and encouraging the department to get us some presentations and update biological information so we're in a better position to make a decision. I don't know, I'd like to have board discussion on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we've had a lot of discussion about sheep, and it seems that we always get a lot of discussion with sheep when sheep populations start to drop. And the department has had a very difficult time due to weather and sometimes staffing to get correct and current data that this board needs. I think former member Ted Spraker, made the best comment. We live and die on data on this board. And so, if the department's able to get significant, sheep surveys done and added information, I would encourage the board to have a special work session. If it's cumbersome, a Zoom meeting would probably suffice. And I think the public would want to hear and want to know, late summer what the department had come up with, and I can support something like this.
Other board discussion here. I've had a number of members of the public that have come to me and suggest that we set up a sheep working group or something, but it's not a time to do, in my opinion, it's not a time to do that when the department is a couple of years behind on getting the sheep surveys done in a number of areas, especially the most critical ones. You have people just fighting with each other without any more information than we have. And so that's what I would, I'd like Ryan's or Stosh's comment first, and then Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to agree. I agree with Member Brett about having this, and I think we need it.
Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just as the board has heard an extensive amount of public testimony and deliberation on sheep, we get it. I mean, we heard it too. We've been here. I will certainly. I've got a note out to some of our leadership in our sheep world, and to just, timing is a question. And so if I could have a little latitude on, providing some suggestions on when that would work, I'd appreciate it. We're starting to work on that now, literally. And, I think we'd want to wait until at least after we know kind of the normal timeframe when sheep surveys are conducted, and try to and get you the most up-to-date information we have. At the same time, we also recognize we don't want to wait too long. Everybody's busy with lots of different things, and summertime in Alaska is a very busy time. But even if I just had a few weeks to try to pin down a time frame to do this, I'd appreciate that.
No, I think that would be fine with everyone here. I would ask the board to authorize me to write a letter to the commissioner and, of course, CC Ryan and the board members asking for this so that we have it an official record of that action.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we let our chairman write a letter to the department with the subject we just talked about, and giving him the authority to set up something. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Second?
Go ahead, Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So 100% behind this, everything that's been said so far. The only disclaimer I'm going to say is what I do for a living, and we book several months out, I will do everything in my power to participate in that meeting, but I can't guarantee it.
Yeah, I think that's understood. Anytime we have a work session, and this would not be a regulatory meeting, but a work session for informational purposes, and anytime we book anything during fishing season or hunting season, it does impact people here. Sometimes I'm even impacted in golf season, but that's another story. I did have to adjust a tee time once for one of our meetings, so it's a tough life, but someone has to do it.
It's going to be 127 degrees. You'll be fine.
No, I wouldn't be in that area at that time of year. So in any event, I'll go ahead and get that letter drafted, and we'll let people see what it says. And with that, we have a letter from the Koyukuk Advisory Committee about sheep, and I wanted to read a portion of this into the record. It's I believe everyone here everyone on the board has a copy of it, but this is another unit besides 19C, and they're concerned that the sheep population is around 25% for the typical surveys since 2002 in the Central Brooks Range. Most or all of GMU 25A, and that their concern is that the ADF and G data collection does not have vital age composition for half, 3/4, 7/8 curl rams. These composition data would show the nearing elimination of the remaining breeding rams. And the data would also show the age composition of the ewes. Legal ram data only does not and cannot support a harvestable surplus analysis, in their opinion. So that's the type of concern we're getting from people. They would like to, another area that these people would like to have closed sheep hunting, and they're very concerned with the data that the department has and is made publicly available. So just wanted to put that on the record that it's not 19C. It's a statewide concern in many cases. And the next item on our miscellaneous business agenda is that at our earlier meeting, we adopted Kenai as the place for our meeting next March, and subsequently, I think we've all heard from Christie that Soldotna would work better, and just wanted to make sure that on the record that we have approval from the board to actually meet in Soldotna rather than Kenai.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we change our meeting date in regional meeting March 2023 to Soldotna.
Excuse me, Al, go ahead.
I'm sorry about that, Mr. Chairman. We are pursuing a meeting location nothing's been final yet. It's still possible we end up in Kenai, but if board's okay with Soldotna, if that site works out, we'll change it to Soldotna. But if it doesn't, we'll go back to Kenai. So I don't want to
Just want to
totally
make sure
exclude Kenai.
that we have approval and no objection to meeting in Soldotna because it might be a better venue, price-wise, space-wise, and they're very close together. I think the two sites are, 12 miles apart? I think between the two ones, so it should have very little effect on the public. And with that, I think there's other business, and I'd like to recognize Al first and then Jake.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was actually kind of just little joking around here earlier in the meeting, and but I thought about it over the week that we were in our meeting, and I would make the suggestion, and I'll listen to other board members, that at the start of every Board of Game meeting, that we say the Pledge of Allegiance. It's something the legislature does, I believe, and we're an arm of the legislature.
Okay, I'm not sure how other members feel. Is there any strong feelings about that? It would require that we have a flag brought into the room. Go ahead, Stash.
Thank you. Just a quick question, and I think I tend to agree with that. It makes sense to me, but to the department or maybe Huntington knows, does the Board of Fish do that?
No, but it's fine, I think.
Go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, I like the idea. I do.
Okay, so in your work, you do Pledge of Allegiance, James?
Yeah, I plan on supporting it as well.
Okay. I don't know if we want to make a formal motion to do that when appropriate and in the future. Okay. I think we don't really need a motion. We'll just ask staff to have a flag available and do that at our next meeting. I don't think there's any U.S. flags in this room. And Jake.
Hey, thanks, Mr. Chair. I'd like to draft a letter and have everybody check it out for their approval, but I think we should draft a letter, send it to the Big Game Commercial Services Board, just kind of expressing to them that, listen, there are a lot of concerns with sheep all over the state. Make sure that all those guides are well aware of it and that, it might be a time to practice, discretion,
Okay, thank you, Jake. Any comments from the board? If you want, if you would draft that letter and if it's okay with the rest of the board, if you draft that letter, send it to Christy and me and we'll finalize it and it'll come from, I'll sign it as the board chair. Thanks. Any additional business to come before the board? Yes, Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I know you mentioned it, but, and I was hoping we'd get back before he took off, but just remind the board that Director Grasser, this was likely his last go around for the board. He's been great in many ways. He's kind of one of those guys that's where legends start a little bit. And he brings a lot of that experience here, and I really appreciated him being here. And I also just very quickly, the division staff, folks we brought in from other places, folks that helped out with proposals and A&Rs and the whole 9 yards. Natalie and I were sweating bullets a little bit about this meeting, super happy to get it over with. And we couldn't have done it without the help of everybody that contributed.
Well, thank you, Ryan. And I believe everyone on the board absolutely agrees with you on your staff. You have very professional staff. They do a great job for us. If they'd go out and collect some sheep data, it would be helpful. But, you know, that's not their fault, and it's not, and we understand that they're working as hard as they can, and we do appreciate them. And as far as Mr. Grasser goes, you know, I've worked with Eddie on issues for the last 32 years at least. And personally, I've served on boards with him and worked with him. I know he's a former member of the board, and he is very appreciated, I think, by everyone here. And as you said, you know, I think if I could quote the humble innkeeper of Pikes here, Eddie was a mighty oak, and it would be sad to see it fall. So go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also I sit here and see who's all retiring within the year and shortly. It's gonna be incredible to see how those people are gonna get replaced. They've been a part of this process for a very long time, and, you know, some of the first biologists and fish and game people I had to work with, and now they're leaving, so it just wonders how you can fill shoes like that, so. Not good to see them go.
Anyway, I would suggest a round of applause for the staff here. And before we go ahead, George. Yeah, George. I give a round of applause for the federal managers too, because they actually do contribute a great deal to this. So George, thank you. But before we get off this topic, we do have a board member in the room who has told us that he is not intending to come back. And this is a man who brings a wealth of knowledge and a demeanor and experience that, you know, is unmatched anywhere. And I've really appreciated working with him. This may or may not be the last board meeting with him, but if it is, I don't want to leave these things unsaid, and we have a little bit of a thank you for him here. So Christy will give it to you. Yeah, and I would mention that Orville's one of the few people who, after serving on the Board of Fish, still serves on any board. Is tough enough to serve on a board after the Board of Fish. So with that, any other comments? And Orville, you have the privilege of the floor.
I just want to thank everyone, especially the department. I'd like to say I did something, but really in my mind, I didn't really do enough. I just tried my best with little time I had. And I certainly appreciate everyone, the other board members. They've always been like family to me. Board of Fisheries and now Board of Game. I'll always feel that way. Just really a privilege and honor to serve, and I've been lucky that way. And I thank all of you.
Okay, is there any further business to come before the board? Of course, you know, I have to separately thank Christy and Annie and all the other board support staff, because they make it possible to do this as well as the rest of the department, but we already thanked the rest of the department. So just want to say, Christy, thank you. Annie, thank you. Always want that thumbs up. Okay, with that, I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I make the motion that we adjourn.
Okay, motion is second, we're adjourned.